Thank you so much, Ravi, for throwing a light on the current global situation from a perspective which widens the scope of discussion and also brings in a big picture into this whole affair and some projections into possible futures. And I request everybody to give your immediate comments, immediate feedback on the presentation first in a round. And after the first round, after everybody has spoken, then we will go deep into the issues, questions.
The presentation captured the complex scenario quite well. The emerging world order and who is winning, why they are winning, and who is losing, and why these countries are losing, and the Indian situation. All these things, with their all their complexities, has been presented right before us, and there are many things that are running in my mind now. But the presentation actually made me to consider and think about many things. And thank you, Ravi, for that.
Yeah, thanks a lot. One question which remained with me is that, okay, the earlier assumption, which is slowly changing, is that nation building comes at the cost of creating a good society. And hence, we need to kind of put all our energies towards building a good society and support those institutions and forces. And slowly, that's of course in NSI debates also. What's our idea of India has been discussed. So in that sense, now it helped me to think about how to take both of this forward and how is that possible? That's one question, which is not especially to Ravi or to this platform, but it triggered in me. And also one understanding that I would like to have later is also that when we talk about limitations of liberal democracy, what are they? I think because we speak about liberal democracy as a strength alone, the limitations we don't speak much. So the clarity on that would be useful.
For me, it has been a new learning experience, because the last page of your presentation presents many ideas which seem to be out of the box for me, at least. So the way you were talking about the deep restructuring of the liberal regime, or you talked about building a vanguard of the civilization and nation. So these are issues which someone was uh, mainly conditioned by Marxist understanding and class politics and all those things. So that proposal sounds good, but it seems out of the box for me. So so many of the things which you propose, they look new to me. And secondly, the different aspects of the emerging unfolding world situation, which you described in bit detail on putting in all the facts before us. Though many of us knew it, but still, it was put it in a comprehensive way. So that way, so the whole picture became clear, and your conclusions about the emergent world order and the declining of US, and what are the reasons behind it, or what seems to be reason behind it, and how uh, uh, barring all expectations of not only US but all other people, that Iran will lose the war. That was the initial that was feeling, that the manner in which US had launched that war along with Israel. So initially it looked that Iran is going to lose the war, and that was the prediction in US people also, US media and US class also. And the way it has resisted the onslaught, and it seems to be really winning the war. So the analysis you presented about it, so it looks very convincing. You look very convincing, and who is winning and who is losing in the war. Broad categorization of different countries which you made, that also looks convincing to me. But it definitely raised good questions for many questions for me to understand, to chew upon, to further discuss. Thank you very much. Please, Rosa, go ahead.
Yes. Um, it is a good presentation which made me to learn about the war and the position of the states. But I'm having few doubts. One is Israel is very small when compared to Iran, but Israel is economically stronger when compared to Iran. What is the reason behind the economic strength of the Israel? Though it is very small country when compared to Iran. And the another thing is, if we speak about the strong nation, then automatically the freedom of the citizens or people will come. If the nation becomes stronger, so many feel that the freedom of the people is at stake. So how we have to balance between the strong nation and at the same time the freedom of the citizens will not be at stake. And another thing is, if we see the common thing among all the countries which are now losing, liberal democracy is the common thing. So I am having a doubt that whether the problem is with liberal democracy itself or the backwardness of the societies. For example, in India, this to win the elections, they are making use of the all the things we are now seeing in the Indian society. So the whether this is the problem of the backwardness of the society or it is the problem of the liberal democracy itself. In future, what type of political system we have to have? Thank you.
मतलब बढ़िया, मतलब फाइन प्रेजेंटेशन, काफी अच्छा था। बस मुझे एक क्यूरियोसिटी है कि जैसे हम ईरानियन हिस्ट्री सिविलाइजेशन की बात कर रहे हैं ना, वैसे ही जो इजराइल है, मतलब एक तो कारण है कि आधुनिक कारण है लड़ाई के कि किस तरह रिसोर्सेज के और वहां पे अपनी पावर स्टेब्लिश करने के अमेरिका इजराइल जिस तरह से चाहते हैं, लेकिन एक हिस्टोरिकल रीजन से ईरान ऑर्गेनाइज है, एक तरफा तरह से पूरा, मतलब ईरान ऑर्गेनाइज है। तो इजराइल कोई भी स्टेट लड़ता है तो उसे उसके लोगों का समर्थन तो चाहिए, लेकिन ये जो इजराइल की जो हिस्ट्री है, जो ग्रेटर इजराइल वाला मसला है कि कैसे इस तरह के वार में इजरायली लोग इजरायली रूलिंग फोर्सेस के पीछे क्यों खड़े हैं, तो मतलब दूसरी तरफ से भी देखना चाहिए।
प्रेजेंटेशन बहुत ही बढ़िया था और बहुत एक ब्रॉड पिक्चर समझ में आई। एक छोटा सिविलाइजेशन की बात हो रही थी, तो एक छोटा सा सवाल है कि अगर सिविलाइजेशनल चीज इतनी डीप रूटेड है या सिविलाइजेशनल हिस्ट्री इतनी इम्पोर्टेंट है, जो रोल प्ले करती है एक किसी भी देश के बहुत सारी चीजों में, तो सिविलाइजेशनल हिस्ट्री का बेस होते हुए भी पॉलिटिकल सिस्टम उसको कैसे अफेक्ट करता है? मतलब अगर चाइना रशिया जैसे उदाहरण देखा जाए और उसके बरक्स हिंदुस्तान का देखा जाए, तो हिंदुस्तान का भी सिविलाइजेशनल हिस्ट्री बहुत ही पुराना रहा है और उसका मतलब बेस बहुत स्ट्रांग रहा है। तो वहां पर वो हमारा सिविलाइजेशनल जो इम्पैक्ट होना चाहिए इस पॉलिटिकल सिस्टम ने क्यों उसको बैक स्टेज डाल दिया, क्यों उसको मतलब नीचे कर दिया, और इतना खराब संस्कृति का इतना खराब रूप अभी हमारे सामने नजर आ रहा है, जबकि दूसरे देशों में चाहे वो अथॉरिटेरियन रिजीम हो या जो भी चीजें वहां भी बदली, वहां पे उसका असर, सिविलाइजेशनल असर उस तरह से खत्म नहीं हुआ।
जी गुड मॉर्निंग सबको। मैंने थोड़ा देर से ज्वाइन किया, बट एक तो पूरी मतलब आई थिंक 25 मिनट निकल गया था। उसके बाद जितना मैंने सुना उसमें वो बात तो सब समझ में आ रही है। मुझे सबसे ज्यादा मतलब बतौर एक इंडियन सिविलियन होने के नाते मुझे समझ में नहीं आ रहा कि हिंदुस्तान किस तरह से अब ग्लोबल प्लेटफॉर्म्स पर अपना मुंह दिखाएगा। व्हाट और ये एक बहुत बड़ा सेटबैक है। अब पता नहीं है जिस तरीके से एक्सटर्नल फॉरेन, जिसको फॉरेन पॉलिसी के तौर पे कहें, तो वो बहुत बड़ा सेटबैक है जिसको नेहरू ने बहुत पहले इस्टेब्लिश किया नॉन अलाइन मूवमेंट में, कि हम किसी के पक्ष में नहीं है। और अब हम तो ऐसी जगह पे खड़े हैं कि हाँ, बाकायदा एक जिसको आज के समय में बफून बना दिया है ईरान के लोगों ने। और बाकायदा कल ईरान के किसी एक मिनिस्टर का या किसका स्टेटमेंट था कि यस मिस्टर प्रेसिडेंट से समथिंग, वी आर गेटिंग बोर्ड हियर। सो एक बफून के साथ में, और दूसरा इजराइल और अमेरिका का जो इक्वेशन है, उसने किस तरीके से पूरी दुनिया को ऐसी जगह पे ले आकर के खड़ा कर दिया है, और जिसमें हिंदुस्तान का अपना जो रोल है वो भी मतलब बड़ा आगे चल करके वो बहुत नुकसानदेह है। मतलब ये मुझे लगा बड़ा शर्मिंदगी है। मतलब
मैं सवाल, जब तुम ईरान के बारे में बोल रहे थे तो तुमने कहा कि लार्जली मॉडर्न सोसाइटी है डिस्पाइट थियोक्रेटिक स्टेट, ये बात तुमने कही थी। और वो थोड़ा मतलब उतना आसान, मतलब लगता तो यही है, लेकिन उतना डाइजेस्ट नहीं, आसानी से डाइजेस्ट नहीं होती कि ऐसा क्यों हो पा रहा है कि भाई थियोक्रेटिक स्टेट भी है और लार्जली मॉडर्न सोसाइटी, तुमका कहना है। और दूसरा एक सवाल मेरा है कि अक्सर जो ईरान को लेकर के अमेरिका का, इजराइल का जो प्रतिष्ठित आकलन था कि 2 दिन में 3 दिन में हम जीत जाएंगे, तो ऐसा ऐसा कैसा, इतना उनके पास बड़े बड़े लोग बैठे हुए हैं और सारी जानकारी उनके पास, उम्मीद है हम लोग करते हैं, तो और वो ऐसा ऐसी ऐसी महान बेवकूफी वो कैसे कर सकते हैं, ये सारा मैं बहुत समझ नहीं पा रहा हूँ कि इतना बेवकूफी वो कैसे कर सकते हैं। या जो बार बार लोग इशारा करते हैं, खास करके ट्रम्प के बारे में लोग बताते हैं कि उनको डिटेल प्रेजेंटेशन भी नहीं चाहिए होता है, वो थोड़ा छोटा प्रेजेंट, अगर उनको कुछ प्रेजेंटेशन पेश किया जाए, वो चाहते हैं छोटा प्रेजेंटेशन, वो ज्यादा फट से खत्म कर दें, और उसके साथ आप कुछ वीडियो डाल के उनके असिस्टेंट देते कि क्या हो रहा है। मतलब ज्यादा उनका अटेंशन स्पैन भी बहुत छोटा है, तो उस हिसाब से वो सोचते हैं, उनका सोचने का ये भी इस तरह का है। ऐसा ऐसा जो उनके उनके क्रिटिक आरोप लगाते हैं अमेरिका के अंदर के लोग, इस ढंग से देखा जाए, या क्या किस वजह से हम लोग देख सकते हैं कि ये इतना बड़ा जो हम देख रहे थे सब लोग तैयारी के तौर पर, ईरान की तैयारी के तौर पर, लेकिन ऐसा कैसे हो पाता है, ये मेरी क्वेरी एक है।
Ravi, thanks for a nice presentation. कई बार अपना ये सिविलाइजेशन के ऊपर सवाल आते हैं, लेकिन हमने देखा है रवि, अपने ही आफ्टर इंडिपेंडेंस, जवाहरलाल नेहरू हो, इंदिरा गांधी हो, ये सारे लोग इन वेस्टर्न के सामने खड़े हैं, सीना तान के। और ये भी, वो भी यही कल्चर था, इंडियन सिविलाइजेशन था। और आज हम जो देख रहे हैं मोदी का, एकदम क्या कहे जाएंगे, एकदम सरेंडर किया हुआ, नरेंद्र सरेंडर का वाला मामला, तो ये भी ये इंडियन सिविलाइजेशन है। तो ये जो कॉन्ट्राडिक्शन है वो क्यों, ये एक सवाल दिमाग में आता है, क्योंकि पहले भी तो यही इंडियन सिविलाइजेशन का ही लोग थे, और ये भी इंडियन सिविलाइजेशन का है। लेकिन कई बार मुझे समझ में मतलब सवाल आता है कि जिस प्रकार से आपने किया कि सिविलाइजेशन का प्लस एंड माइनस दोनों होता है, और नैरेटिव क्या सेट करते हो तुम लोगों को बरगलाने के लिए और पावर में आने के लिए, और जो क्लास पावर में आता है वो किस प्रकार से ये हैंडल करता है, मतलब सिविलाइजेशन के सवाल को ही, पॉजिटिव और नेगेटिव दोनों नैरेटिव को, और मेरे ख्याल से नैरेटिव सेट करके ही सत्ता में आते हो। तो ये थोड़ा इसके ऊपर थोड़ा लाइट डाला जाए।
adding to this civilizational question that Ishwar Bhai and other comrades are raising. So another major question for me is that the liberal democracy of India, which has turned into a bane for the country. And you were saying in your presentation that the need of the hour is to deeply restructure it, so it can control the capital and connect with the egalitarian nationalist project. That's a very worthwhile project that Indian liberal democracy has to look into. And I would like to know your ideas on how to restructure the liberal democracy. What do you think of it? How can we do that? Is I would like to.
मौका है क्या? मैं आई वांट टू ऐड वन थिंग. ये जो सिविलाइजेशन वाला इशू है वो बहुत मतलब वो कितना रिलेट करता है मतलब आज ईरान के जो भी बचे हुए लीडर्स हैं, जिस तरीके की वो बातें बोल रहे हैं पूरी दुनिया को ध्यान में रखते हुए, और जिस तरीके का पूरा वेस्ट वर्ल्ड बोल रहा है, उन दोनों के बीच लैंग्वेज का जो डिफरेंस है वो यू कैन बाइफरकेट कि हु इज मोर इनडिग्निफाइड देन अदर. ईरान के जितने भी मिनिस्टर्स का बयान है, आप उनको पॉलिटिकल एरिना में ये नहीं कह सकते हैं कि ये मतलब इनडिग्निफाइड है, बिकॉज दे आर पुल्ड इनटू द वॉर. उसके बावजूद उनके इतने लीडर्स मारे गए, उसके बावजूद उन्होंने किसी और के लिए अभद्र भाषा का इस्तेमाल नहीं किया जितना वेस्ट वर्ल्ड की मीडिया ने किया है या वेस्टर्न पॉलिटिशियंस ने किया है. इवन हमारे यहाँ भी हमारे जो महामहिम है, महामानव, और इतना थियोक्रेटिक सोसाइटी होने के बावजूद कि रडार के रेंज में आने के बाद ये फलाने हवाई जहाज अपने आप को रडार से बचा लेगा, उसके बावजूद उन्होंने इंफ्रारेड टेक्निक का इस्तेमाल किया और टेम्परेचर के बिहाफ पे उन्होंने पेनिट्रेट किया उनको. सो ये तो हमें देखना पड़ेगा कि वो साइंटिफिक भी हैं, थियोक्रेटिक भी हैं, और अभी तक अभद्र नहीं हुए.
Hi, good morning to everyone. Also, thank you so much for the very comprehensive, nice presentation. It was also all the numbers. I felt, it's just good to put everything into perspective, even though if they feel all these tables. Yeah, I was wondering one thing. Maybe it's more from not a very, let's say, zoomed out angle, but more a zoomed in angle. Also because I have quite close friends who are Iranian, who are observing this war, with whom I talk about this war, and I'm wondering, to which extent is this the way Iran was being discussed in this talk? To which extent are we talking about Iran, the nation, versus the Islamic Republic of Iran? Because and to which extent are there commonalities between these two? Yeah, so it felt to me a lot while discussing with my friends that they somehow see this as a war against the Islamic Republic of Iran, and so they almost support this war. There is a hope that they probably hate Khamenei and the successors more than we hate Modi, much more. So it's they see this as a hope for toppling of this regime, which has systematically weakened its people. So it's as again I'm saying, this is probably not going into the theme of the whole talk itself, which is more about imagining nations and this, but I wonder to which extent, which kind of Iran are we talking about?
Despite being a theocratic state, the Iranian state, I think, remained in its core a Persian nation state, which fought against imperialism, colonialism, a lackey state, American lackey state or Western lackey state, and which wanted to preserve its own independence, political independence, and also which wants to protect its own cultural legacy and etc. and all. So all those cultural aspirations, all those political aspirations for political independence to protect the sovereignty from the imperialists and their lackeys, which all uh, they all motivated behind the revolution. So this republic, this state, is the result of a revolution. And even though in the final, after the revolution, it took the shape of a theocracy, but nonetheless, the Persian national pride, Persian national independence, and all those things are very much there, part of the Persian, this Iranian state. And because of the theocracy, because of the oppression, there are internal divisions, and there are serious struggles are going on against the state, and that definitely will go on. But nonetheless, if there is an external aggression, so that nationalist part, that Persian part uh, of the state and society, that connection between the society and state, then they will get reinvigorated. They will come into play significant, and they become more pronounced and prominent. That's what is happening, I think. Uh, and secondly, after listening to Ravi, what I feel, it seems that there are two kinds of civilization. One is civilization as a way of life, which is horizontal, which can be seen only the way the people live on day-to-day basis in their belief system, in their cultural practices, uh, in their uh, way of conducting both individually as a community, collectives. So it's more like very close to day-to-day life, civilization as a living process on a day-to-day basis. But uh, there are other kinds of civilization or other aspects of civilization which are not just horizontal, not just way of life, but also vertically organized in the sense that there are institutions, state apparatuses, ideologies, and intellectual cultural traditions which have shaped that life and shaped the whole society and sustained for quite some time so that a new dimension got added that civilization. And state and its institutions and cultural institutions play a very important role in uh, making that civilization in a way two-dimensional, not just horizontal way of life kind of civilization, but also institutional, also high culture and all. So only in those civilizations which this vertical dimension has developed, evolved to those civilizations seem to succeed in um, evolving into civilization state, either in Chinese case or now it's clear in the case of Iran. Uh, and in Indian case, why a civilization state became very difficult because we lacked exactly the political dimension. For quite some time, uh, we lack that. And civilization, Indian civilization definitely is there, but it's more like a day-to-day life, day-to-day practice, cultural practice, belief system, or a total personality, a social personality kind of a civilization. So I think that is one of the biggest problem in creating a civilization state out of India. That's how I feel. And on top of it, yes, liberal democracy in abstract is very good, but in actual practice, it also conjures many uh, demons and dark sides, and it can lead to authoritarianism, fascism, and all that, other things, and corruption and all that. So India uh, is not has not really transformed. Indian society has not transformed, and Indian state uh, through liberal democracy, through liberal democratic institutions, definitely gained. But at the same time, the negative aspects or the problems of liberal democracy has caught up. So we have lost in both the ways. Uh, that is, I think, a new insight I got from this. So I just want to propose Ravi's view that can every old, ancient, strong civilization can form civilization state? Are there any some conditions? For me, it appears there are two preconditions.
Bhargav's comment, I could not fully follow because, either it was interrupted or when his voice came continuously, then it was for some reason for me, it was booming as if he was far away from the speaker or something. And it was kind of resonating. The room was resonating. So I will come back to that, clarify with him later, very good questions. And let me do the following. Let me start from more concrete, like talking about the questions about Iran and Israel, as things are happening. And as things are there inside Iran and inside Israel and so on, that are coming out in the light of this war or that we know generally. So concrete questions about Iran and Israel first. And then later on, I will move to more general questions about limitations of liberal democracy and desirability or undesirability of nation and so on, and then later on about civilization, and I think that I have noted down questions. If something I'm not able to cover in the general answer, then I will come to specific questions. So as many of you have pointed out, especially, Anand in the comment in the chat box and Urmi later, about how do we look at Iran and the present state, how much, when we speak of Iran, how much do we mean this state, the Islamic Republic and the Iranian society and civilization, So one, I have to basically clarify, which if it was not clear enough in the presentation or short comments in the presentation, I would like to clarify now that I am not full of admiration for everything in Iran. Um, and how the way things have developed, we should look at our own um, the way our own emphasis changes in our mind. Um, when revolution happened, at that time, leftist and liberals, progressive people played as big a role in fighting against the Shah regime and against American, basically a client regime of America, that is what, in a semi-colonial or neo-colonial or whatever term you use, kind of regime. And the leftist and progressive people, and including liberals, modernists, were at the forefront of that struggle. Okay. But so were the mullahs, so were the religious leaders, so was the religious resistance against Shah. The emphasis was different. Anti-colonial was the dominant feature of the liberals and progressives, and anti-modernity, was the dominant feature of the religious leaders who were fighting against Shah. And we, of course, there should not be any confusion that we stand against the brutality of this Islamic regime against other revolutionaries, against leftist and progressives and liberals. And we stand by that position even today. But there are two questions there that we, while being clear in which side we are on, if it inside Iran, the question is that of theocracy versus liberals or leftists. It is clear which side we are on. We are on the side of progressives, on the side of leftists, on the side of modernists. But then we have to answer the question that why did that part got defeated? We can denounce the regime for being brutal towards people, liberals and progressive sections. But we also have to answer the question, why did one side win and the other side lose? Why did it, the whole history turned in such a way that Islamic Republic was established and not a secular republic, was established in Iran. A secular anti-colonial, anti-American republic was established in Iran. So okay, I will come to the comments later. Let me just proceed. Yeah, there are some comments. Okay, so I will come to the comments later. So right now, we can have various topics to discuss, and if we are discussing the internal developments inside Iran, if that is the topic, then this will become the main thing. Why did we lose? Why did they win? And how brutal they are, and how is it that a significant portion or maybe a majority of this so-called modern Iranian society still supports mullahs. That will be the discussion. My emphasis in today's discussion is in the context of war. And so the emphasis is not so much on what is happening internally, what has been happening internally in Iran in last 47 years. That is a different topic. But my position is clear that I stand with the liberals and progressives. And the other way to look at it is that even the liberals and progressives in the current developments have been forced to put that question aside. Even those, as Urmi was saying, the people who feel much more strongly against the theocracy, and Khamenei and so on, than we feel against our current rulers, Modi and so on. Even those people would not like to be seen as a standing with US or Israel. Okay. So the question is clear that there is aggression against Iran by United States and by Israel, and that forces, whether you like it or not, that forces a kind of brings into existence, conjures up an Iranian nation which is standing and fighting against the hegemon, against the criminal state of Israel, genocidal state of Israel, that is the irony. Those people who have been brutal against you, repressive against you, history or the global developments turns in such a way that their standing up to America and Israel becomes the dominant feature of being Iran today. Okay, and our question, the way we were brutalized, the progressive Iranians were brutalized by the theocracy, that goes, that gets diluted to some extent. It's not our fault. And if we insist on always bringing out, that in the fight against imperialism, empire, that Iranians as a nation are putting up, confronting that, then we will insist on bringing that. Don't forget that these are the butchers of leftists, these theocratic, this is theocratic strong state, has been very harsh on a significant portion of Iranian people. and they have curbed rights, and they have done this to leftists, they have done that to women, and so on. We will keep on insisting, then we will then we will in a way harm our own cause, because as history moves, some questions come to the forefront and some very important questions go, in the back door. And if we insist on giving same importance all the time, independent of the political developments that are taking place, then we will not be able to serve our own cause, make our own point. So right now, especially in the light of what Israel has done in Gaza and what has happened in last few years, at the kind of genocidal, brutal aspect of Israel, which should be no surprise to anyone, but has especially come to light. And in the light of Iran being, even the theocratic Iran, the Islamic Republic of Iran, being the only obstacle in the plan of Israel supported by America, to have the Greater Israel Project, an American deep state planning for last 20 years to do away with all these 6 or 7 regimes. Iran is the only one, left standing. We will have to adjust to this. We will have to adjust to this. That does not take away our dislike or our opposition to the brutalities that this Iranian regime has done to parts of its own society. That's the clarification. Why did these people win? Now, that is how, unfortunately, history turns. The progressives, I don't know, I am not an expert on Iranian history, and I haven't followed the details of the various forces that were fighting against Shah and against America, in 70s, and how did finally Shah had to run away and Islamic Republic came into existence. I haven't paid detailed attention to that. But very broad features you can easily see, even someone who hasn't read the history in detail, which is that soon after 1979, Iran-Iraq war starts. And Iran-Iraq war starts, you cannot help but thinking that because they were pushed out of Iran, the empire was pushed out of Iran, it tried another way to encircle it and suppress it. Okay. So Iran-Iraq war was the biggest war that Iran has faced, in last, several centuries, I will say, and even bigger than today. 500,000 people, 5 lakh or 7 lakh Iranians lost their life, and the war went on for 8 years, and the kind of sacrifice that Iranian people made in order to win that war finally, despite, and, one feels very disturbed by the fact that even Soviet Union was supporting Saddam against Iran. Not only America was, Saddam was the agent of America in the war against Iran. Even Soviets were supporting, Saddam, against Iran. If that did not happen, then the internal struggle, internal political, maybe class struggle inside Iranian society would have taken a different turn. And what I will later make a few more comments. In this tension between how do you create a strong nation, on whatever value comes handy in bringing together the nation, versus creating a good society, a modern, liberal, rights-based, equality, emancipation, all the good values and features of a good society. If there is a tension between the two, then the good society, struggle for good society was pushed aside by the struggle for a nation fighting against external aggression. So I think my guess is, and again, I am not speaking from very concrete knowledge, but my guess is that the internal history of Iran, which forces would be, and internal struggles, trajectory of internal struggles of Iran would have been very different if the Iran-Iraq war had not taken place. So Iran-Iraq war, as it is happening in the current war too, makes the project to build a mobilized, a strong nation, the principal project, main project. Under external aggression, nationalism rises. Nationalism of the people who are internally divided is still there is an external aggressor. Then these people are forced to unite, in face of external aggression. And that has been the history. And the reason I am pointing this out is for us to be realistic and truthful, not only ideological, truthful and factual when understanding history. Okay, that is what I meant when I said that in face of what Iran is doing today, if you keep on raising the question that don't forget that these people are brutal rulers to their own people, the theocratic state, is a brutal state against its own people. If you keep raising that, you will not serve your own purpose, your own argument. So that is what I meant. My position is clear about the theocratic state, but I also think that the theocratic state was better placed, despite all its wrong things, was better placed to mobilize a nation, against external aggression and against the empire and against Israel, against the criminality of Israel. Okay, so you see that the people who are fighting, against Israel in the neighborhood and against America in the neighborhood, it is mostly based on national subjugation and the project of creating a good society, has taken a back seat. Palestine, for example, Palestine is a national question first. And what kind of Palestine will be created? How much secular, how socialist, how progressive, how emancipated? What kind of society Palestinian nation, will cover? Will what kind of society will thrive under the future Palestinian nation? That question will arise later. Right now, the question of Palestinian nation is at the forefront. And same way, under aggression, the question of Iranian nation, even if it is led by a government which is not interested in creating the best society for Iranian people, still that question of Iranian nation gets underlined. And this question relates to, this is just as an example for us, for our more long-term discussion on the role of national mobilization versus a struggle for creating a good society. This tension, in my view, is always there in today's world, in all countries. You can't wish nations away. And you can't wish modernity or good emancipated society away. Both the projects are there. Our dream was that nation will fall by the wayside and we will create good society under socialism, under emancipatory, values and struggles. We will create good society all over the world. And gradually the need for national mobilization and national identities and national boundaries will become less relevant for human history. That was our dream, maybe in many ways that remains our dream. And yet we have to be realistic enough to see the world as it is developing and countries as they are, moving forward to future. In that, the role of nation has become has remained important. In fact, that's a long subject, and we will keep on coming back to various aspects of this subject. What was the nature of globalization in the period of unipolar world? What was the globalization of? We have argued for 30 years. We even wrote a book called Globalization of Capital. That was capitalist globalization, which negated national boundaries. For capital, there were no nations it could go anywhere, get invested anywhere, and so on. And it could just jump over national boundaries. National boundaries were only for people. They had to get visa to go to another country. Those boundaries were only for people, not for capital. Then it appeared as though nation is the way capital rules the world and the way it controls the narrative. 30 years ago or till 20 years ago, we felt that globalization is the order of the day and nation is on the way out. Okay. But now nation has come back. Why? Because the protector of globalization, namely the unipolar world led by or dominated by America, that is going down the drain. So right now, capital again has to hide behind nation. American capital would like to dominate the whole world, and the American capital or the global capital, will keep jumping around. But because as nation comes into play in the multipolar world, and the American hegemony and American globalization is opposed on the basis of Chinese being organized, mobilized as a nation, Russians being organized and mobilized as a nation, and now Iranians being mobilized as a nation. If that reality comes into play, then it is not up to you or to us to throw the concept of nation in the dustbin of history. We can't throw it. It is not up to us. Nation has come to play a role, and we can't get away from that fact. That does not mean that we admire the national mobilization and the cause of nation in such a way that we will support or applaud every brutal dictator who puts a nation together. So if a Hitler comes around and puts the German nation together, we will applaud it because nation is a good thing. No, not at all. We are not saying that. We are not saying that. We are saying something, different, something general, that in the global affairs compared to 30 years ago, unipolar world and globalization of capital, now we have a multipolar world, and the opponents of American hegemony arguing that all nations should in principle be equal. Even the people who are saying that all nations should be equal will not treat all the nations equal. We should have no illusions of that. But China, which is the emergent superpower, says that all nations, all 193 of them, should be treated equal. Okay. So that is in order to oppose the American singularity or American uniqueness or American self-proclaimed right to rule over the world, that they are contesting, that they are challenging. They will establish their own hegemony in their own way, hopefully not in the American way. But so we don't have to take them at their word that they will treat every Qatar, every Bahrain, every Vietnam, and every Bangladesh as equal to China. No, they will not do that. And yet, this position is better than the globalized, world under the hegemony of one superpower, unipolar world. So that is, I am not being very clear and pointed, but you, I hope, get the point that I am just being realistic in terms of understanding which ideas, which concepts are playing what role in the current developments of the world. Okay. Second question was about Israel. Ramani asked, and some others also brought it, that how come both the things, that how come Israel, such a small nation, and encircled by people who are wronged by it and hence feel hostile to it, is so strong, and it does, genocide. It kills children in thousands. It bombs hospitals and schools, and yet Israeli people support their government and support the war it unleashes on the neighbor. How does that happen? Two aspects of the question. Again, Israel people say that is strong because, it is American project or it is the Western project, So, I was very happy to see one Orthodox Jewish rabbi living in UK, expressing what I always feel to express, that the Germans killed the Jews, or the Western civilization was anti-Semitic and killed the Jews. And how did they compensate? By taking land from somebody else and giving it to the Jews. Palestinian people did not kill Jews, and had no animosity to Jews. And Jews and Palestinian people have lived for 1,000 years, together. And yet, Israel was created in Palestine. Okay. That is the irony. And I was very happy to hear a Jewish rabbi saying that in very many words. Why isn't land given to Israel, he was saying, and I liked it. He said that, why don't Americans give Florida to Jews? So, or Germans create some Jewish land inside Germany now that they are large enough, East and West is united, So, but that doesn't happen. Israel was a colonial project. Israel is an apartheid state. Israel took mythological argument that is the promised land, So took mythology out, just as Ram was born, under that mosque, just as Indians are sure that Ram was born under that Babri mosque, Same way, I mean, more than Ram. Ram's case is much more laughable, but where he was born. But this mythology of which is the promised land, and when will Messiah come again, and what will happen to the relationship between Jews and Christianity and so on, all those giving rise to a lot of Christian Zionists today in America. Those are details. I will not go into all of that. But this mythological argument to create Israel where it is, in fact, was a colonial project. British created it because British were ruling that land, and when they vacated, as when they vacated South Asia, they created two countries, India and Pakistan. We are also responsible, but largely they created it. And same way, Israel was created as they were vacating Palestine. Okay. In fact, there is a lot of similarity between division of South Asia into India and Pakistan and creation of Israel. But anyway, those are again details. What I mean is that Israel is strong because Western imperialism is strong. It was their creation and they have supported it. Right now, Americans, in more and more, it has depended on America, but entire Europe, also has been supportive of Israel. And even today, Israel, European ruling class and maybe large part of European people too have kept quiet, while seeing in front of their eyes the genocide in Gaza and what is now happening in West Bank and what Israel has done. Okay. So it is the Israel's power, one part of Israel's power comes from imperialism, comes from being Western creation, and comes from the fact that entire West has been standing solidly behind it. But the other part also should not be ignored. At the same time, despite all this backing of imperialism and Western civilization, the Israel also has been a besieged state, and naturally so. If you create the state in these conditions by displacing the natives, taking land away from the people who have lived there for thousands of years, then that state will be besieged, will be encircled by hostility. So Israel has been always encircled by what they call barbarians. Okay. The Arab, brown, people, brown Arab people, the kind of racism that is there in Israel, is mind-boggling. But what it creates is a sense of add to the feeling of victimhood of Holocaust, of what Germans did to Jews, in middle of 20th century, in the Second World War and before, add to that victimhood this sense of besieged, this sense of being encircled by barbarians. If you do not prepare yourself well, you will be run over by barbarians because there are too many around you. and you are too small. This sense has given rise to urgency and national mobilization in Israel. This sense of being besieged, So they have worked very hard in a very mobilized way, to upgrade themselves, their large part of them have come from Western civilization. They have come with the education and science and technology and management and everything. Um, some part is Arab Jews. They are even inside Israel, Arab Jews are treated as racial um, subordinates by the European Jews who are in Israel. But the fact of the matter is that Israel has organized itself very strongly, very focusedly as a nation, as a country, feeling besieged by barbarians, quote unquote barbarians, what they call barbarians around, and has made the best use of imperialist support, imperialist finance, imperialist technology, imperialist capital for becoming a rich and powerful society, very advanced in science and technology and management and all kinds of you must have heard about Mossad being the most powerful agency, and they are such that the tail can wag the dog. Israel can blackmail US, who is its protector, and one aspect of that is that the way the Zionist billionaires have a out of proportion political influence in American politics, On top of that, they do all these dubious things, as has come out in Epstein files and activities of criminals like Epstein, what kind of influence they have, what kind of deep, um, access to state power in America and in many other countries they have. Israel has done all that. Israel has done all that. I did not dwell too much on the Gulf countries. Gulf countries is almost a second tier protection for Israel, and you must have heard of Abraham Accord. Many of these GCC countries have an accord with Israel, and even in this current war, you must be hearing that especially UAE is egging America and Israel to continue the war and decimate Iran. Okay. And Iran is being very patient and very wise in not underlining the animosity of the Gulf countries against Iran, against itself. It is being very diplomatic, very polite, and it started by bombing only the American bases. And now that the Iran is being decimated all around, not only the economic institutions are being bombed, but hospitals and schools and people are being bombed in Iran. Iran, the only way it can retaliate is by two things: by blocking Strait of Hormuz, affecting the global economy, and second, being forced to attack the oil installations, and so on. Even now, it is not attacking the water desalination plants, for example, because Iran does not want the people in the Gulf region, who are largely immigrants, by the way, but people in the Gulf region to suffer, people to die, of thirst, And when Israel, under a false flag operation, attacked a desalination plant in, I think Kuwait or Qatar, I'm forgetting, one of the countries, then Iran clarified that they are not responsible. Israelis must have done it. So you see the kind of thing that that Israel has been able to do is multifaceted. Brute support from America and from West, but at the same time inner strength too. And why do people support such butcher rulers as Israel has? Well, that's a very difficult question to answer. Even after 2-3 years of Gaza genocide, Israeli people were supporting their government. And in fact, Netanyahu could ensure more people support, more he attacked other countries, or more brutalities, his state indulged in? That is a difficult thing to answer. The straight question is that people feel besieged. People think that survival of Israel and their own survival is at stake. And if Israel does not attack the Iran and many other countries around, if Israel does not do all the criminal things that it does, Israel will not be safe. And these are the people who live there. Israel is their country, I mean, right or wrong, Israel should not have been created, and this apartheid state should not have come into existence. And the land for Palestinians should not have been taken away. Being very clear about all that, still Israel is now a country, and Israel has these 10 million citizens. And they feel besieged that, quote unquote, they agree with criminals like Netanyahu that if you are not strong, you will be run over by barbarians. So that gives rise to Israeli nationalism, this Zionist nationalism, inside Israel, support for the crimes of their state, that has happened in past, I mean, Hitler's Germany was the quintessential example. 90% or 95% of Germans were supporting Hitler, especially after he unleashed the war. And despite, all the things that, German state was doing, especially against Jews, but against many other parts of the population, against all their opponents, What can you do? That is how things are. That is how things are. Not very far, is the situation of ours, where large part of our own population thinks that if you are a true Hindu, you will support Hindutva, you will support Modi, and so on. That is how things happen. So that is the strength of Israel. Now that, let us move on to the two larger questions, one of liberal democracy and nation, and then of civilization. Am I taking too long? Should I stop for further comments?
I think you should continue. You should answer those questions. Many questions have been raised. So I think one round of answering would be good, be better.
Let us then come to this. What do I mean by constraints or limitations of liberal democracy, and what is the alternative? Many of you have raised that question. So I am not taking each question by name. In that category, let us see what do we mean. The standard model of liberal democracy is multi-party electoral politics. There are other models too, and there are other detailed variations. Somewhere you have a state or democracy operating through parliament being the main power and creating the executive, as it is the case in Britain and in India. But there is the US example too, where president is elected by the people directly, and then parliament is also, Congress is also elected separately, and there is a separation of powers and checks and balances, all that complicated, state structure that America has. I am not going to go into the details of various forms of liberal democracy. I will couple all of them together. So what is the general feature? General feature is multi-party electoral democracy. And occasional, I mean, the periodic elections taking place to elect the rulers, to elect the executive, and so on. Now, when the power, the reconstitution or re-election of power is so concentrated in one election that comes after 4 or 5 years, invariably technology develops to win that elections. So then a politics arises where internal politics, or let me call it domestic politics, is always on the table. So even when India or America or Britain, is dealing with other nations, dealing with foreign policy, dealing with geopolitics, dealing with world economy, and so on, no ruler democratically elected ruler can ignore the implications of its foreign policy or geopolitics on the domestic politics. It has become more and more visible or naked in the case of populist right-wing rulers. Populist right-wing rulers, they always keep domestic politics in center, and they do their world politics, in such a way that their domestic political strength is not weakened, does not go away. So at the broadest level, I feel that this liberal democracy has this limitation that if a country has to deal with other countries as a nation, if one nation stands, vis-a-vis other nations and in a global, geopolitical, complex situation, this keeping one eye always on domestic politics, becomes a constraint. This is one example what I mean by the limitations of liberal democracy. Liberal democracy always keeps domestic politics at the table so that the interest of the nation, so to speak, cannot be well served, by a government which always has to worry about keeping its vote bank intact or keeping the prospects of its winning the next election, alive. Okay, that is one example of the limitation. The other big example is that these elections can be managed. They can be influenced by money power, by power of capital. So more and more, as the domestic politics under intensive liberal democracy has become more and more competitive, the role of capital, role of money, role of economic power has become more and more pronounced in the political arena. So the capital, the corporates, the crony capitalists especially, they play a big role. You look at the APEC in America, the Zionist billionaires, the way they influence, elections in America, or look at the corporates in India who have decided to back solely BJP and Sangh Parivar. Earlier it used to be the case that they used to back everybody, so that the feature was that more or less they will, depending on who promises what and how strong is a given party, depending on that, they will determine the size of their support, but the capital will support more or less all parties. That has more or less changed in last 10, 15 years, especially in last 10, 11 years. So the role of money and economic power and corruption in managing elections and in constituting the state becomes a dominant feature of liberal democracy, and I cannot see it anything other than constraint. The constraint or the bad feature of liberal democracy coming to fore. Then the third feature, you look at it. The third feature is that democracy, among other things, was supposed to politicize people, to educate the masses politically. Because through democracy, masses become political agents. They participate in elections. And if democracy is decentralized and several layers of democracy comes into play, then they become more and more political. They become politicized. In the positive sense, I'm saying, they become political agents. That was the expectation from democracy, that through democracy, modernity, political modernity will get established even in a society which was earlier not modern. That was the expectation of democracy, coming from its European heritage, and coming from its linkage with, modern Enlightenment values. Now, opposite is happening. You see, in the competitive electoral democracy, people are being lured or being convinced to support this party rather than that party based on their pre-modern identities, based on their religious identities, based on their caste identities, based on their other identities. So the identity-based representation, that becomes a principal feature of political arena of liberal democracy. You have to decide whether it is good or bad. And do not think that I am opposed to any kind of affirmative action or reservation. I am for reservation. I am for affirmative action. That is because in a society where certain communities are historically, disadvantaged, they will have to be given enough extra support to come at par with the rest of the society. But do you think that this should translate into identity-based representation being the principal feature of liberal democracy? Isn't that happening at the cost of individual being a political agent? At the cost of that? Isn't it that at the cost of bringing modernity to the society? And will that not open the doors for bringing the worst of the social feature into the political arena? Communalism and communal riots being one feature, right in front of our eyes. Communalism has been reinforced and activated by liberal democracy. It is as clear as daylight, and it is so clear that we don't talk about it. If it is too common, if it is too much in front of your eyes, if it is too obvious, you don't talk about it. That becomes obvious. So liberal democracy is the main culprit of making India communal. Of course, added to that is the fact that if Indian society and Indian civilization did not have those subterranean fault lines, if it did not have religious divisions, if it did not have seeds of communalism, if it did not have seeds of sectarian identities, then liberal democracy by itself will not be able to create it. So both the things are there. Those features are there in our social life and social mind, and liberal democracy activates it, together. So this is another bad feature of liberal democracy, that it brings the worst out of the people, in the political arena. Now, just because we don't have a good alternative to liberal democracy, should we cast a blind eye to such blatantly negative features of liberal democracy as it is playing itself up, in large part of the world? That is what we bring to question. And somebody asked the question that what is, Madhvi, I think, asked that what is the alternative? Do I have some alternative to restructuring liberal democracies? That's a difficult question to answer. Short answer is that I don't have it, but then, I can go on to suggest this and that, the way we should proceed, and that we often discuss in NSI, and we can keep that as a prospective topic for a future study circle, in which we can discuss that. The coming up with alternative is a very tough business. But that connects with any alternative that you come up with or for restructuring liberal democracy will link up with two things. One thing is the arena of nation, and the other thing is arena of society and civilization. So let us come to those two last point, last general features. What nation, I have already spoken in the beginning talking about Iran, that nation ideologically, you think the nationalism and concept of nation as a positive feature or as a negative feature of human history, that is a separate debate. I am being here only factual and realistic, that especially in a multipolar world, when multipolar world and new world order is being reconfigured and being brought into existence on the basis of reviving the concept of sovereign nation state, reviving the concept of equality of nations, when that is the feature that is going to be pronounced in the next decade or more, then you cannot ignore the concept of nation. And that we often discuss inside NSI, that we do not look at nation as an ideological point the way leftists have looked at nation. They have largely been critical of it, and leftists have largely been, especially Marxists, have largely been internationalist. That's a separate debate, and let us park that aside, as we have been forced to park the question of socialism aside, because nowhere in the world socialism is immediately on the agenda. Nowhere in the world there is a strong communist party leading a strong revolution which can hope to establish socialism in a large or a small country. That does not mean that we are giving up socialism. That only forces us to rethink about what will be the future socialism. But that again is for another day. That's a separate debate. Right now, we are forced to grapple with the re-emergence of importance of nation in the world politics. And the challenge is that whether you like it or not, you will have to try to make use of the concept of nation. Number one, to fight against imperialism and external aggressors. And number two, to mobilize the nation to create a good society for itself. So for international purposes, external purposes, as well as for internal purposes, creating a good society within, you will need limited utility and validity of nation. Limited but important utility and validity of nation. That is the approach we take of nation. Add to that the example presented by India itself. In India, the concept of nation, as we often discuss, is a very shallow concept of nation. In India, concept of nation came together in national movement against colonialism. So the makeup of Indian nation is quintessential anti-colonial. Then on the basis of that anti-colonial nationalism, we created a republic. And we wrote a constitution. And we defined the citizen. And once the republic was carved out, once the citizen was defined, then we said that nation is the national nation of the citizen. So Indian citizen, has this Indian nation. That became the more or less foundation or explanation of Indian nation. And other definition of nation, whether it has to have a common language, a common, social soil, a common history, unified history and so on. The standard model definitions of nation, on that India cannot qualify as a nation. And yet existence of Indian nation based on anti-colonial nationalism and based on the nationalism of the citizen now, based on the definition of republic and based on the political definition of India, what India is, that is the concept of nation we have. And that concept of nation was challenged by a malignant concept of nation, which said that Indian nation has to be a Hindu nation. It has to be rooted in the history of this land. And the history of this land is the land of Hindus. This land belongs to Hindus. It is a wrong notion of nation. It is a malignant notion of nation. It is the unhistorical notion of nation. And yet, it has become, after 100 years work, 100 years hard work by Hindutva forces of various kinds, now it has become powerful enough to challenge the modern concept of notion, which is based on nationalism of the citizen and nationalism defined vis-a-vis outside, anti-colonial and so on. Okay. Somebody was asking that how come Nehru and Indira even could stand up to foreign powers, and this 56-inch chest, surrenders, so easily. That is a clear example of what kind of nationalist you are. If you are basically, your nationalism is rooted in anti-colonialism, and in the sovereignty of the nation state that comes out of that anti-colonial struggle, then you will have the courage to stand up to others. You know, they may or may not have as much courage, Nehru and Indira, as we leftists would have liked to, you know, but that's a separate matter. You know. But they were by and large could stand up to powerful external, you know, countries and forces. But these people, they, you know, their behavior in the anti-colonial struggle, these people they were not anti-colonials. In fact, in many ways, they were supporters of colonials. You know. And the colonials could make use of them. That, yeah, you are Hindus, we know you are Hindus, good, be Hindu, but remain under the British rule. You know. So they said that, be Hindu and Muslim and remain under the British rule. And these people said that as long as you consider us, you know, as the main inhabitant of this land, and as long as you know, pay lip service to Hindu civilization, you know, we have no problem with your rule. Keep on ruling. You know, that was their understanding. How do you think that they will stand up to any external forces? They just don't know what sovereignty is, what independence is. You know, for them, the Indian nation state is their power through which they can rule over the Indian masses, through which they can transfer all the national wealth to select corporates, including themselves. You know, recently it came to light, I think, you know, Rahul Gandhi or somebody said that, you know, Adani is not even an independent corporate house. You know, this is basically BJP money and BJP corporation, you know. So, you know, I mean, where does nation figure in their concept? So nation figures in their concept only as religion and only as a political strategy to fool people and to mobilize people the way Hitler mobilized Germans as Aryans, same way, you know, Modi is mobilizing Indians as Hindus. So you see that the nation, I mean, we say that they are wrong. Of course, they are wrong. But as I always take this attitude that when wrong people win, we cannot keep on repeating that they are bad and they are wrong. We also have to answer the question that why do they win despite being bad and despite being wrong? Why do they win? And when we go into that analysis, then we find that the shallow nationalism of the Indian citizen is not enough to counter the nationalism that claims to be rooted in the Indian soil. So they have given a wrong example of Hindutva nationalism being rooted in the Indian soil. We will have to come up with some other example of Indian nation being rooted in Indian civilization. That is not the only thing that will define Indian nation. We are not going to become civilizationist. We are not going to keep all our political eggs in the civilization basket. But we will have to add that civilizational dimension to the conceptualization of a modern nation. The anti-colonial aspect will remain intact. The modern aspect based on Indian Republic will remain intact. The modern aspect based on equality of all citizens and Indian nation being the nation of all Indian citizens, that will remain intact. But on top of that, you will have to add the civilizational historical dimension. You will have to show that why do you think Indians are Indians and Chinese are Chinese and Iranians are Iranians and Russians are Russians? Because that's a fact of life. Russians are Russians and Indians are Indians. And there is little chance of creating a human nation all over the planet where Russians and Chinese and Indians and Iranians, you know, all of them will belong to the same nation. Then nation will go away under that kind of, you know, planetary politics and planetary society. Nation will go away, but I don't know when that will come. In the meantime, we will be confronted with this malignant nationalism which will claim to be rooted in their societies and in their social soil. So we have no recourse but to redefine India, reimagine India. And that brings me to the last point of civilization. So we are forced to come to nation because of limitations of the current political arena, including liberal democracy. Once we are forced to accept nation, even though we are not vulgar nationalist or nationalist per se, still we have to, as realists in politics, we will have to recognize the importance of nation as it plays in today's world. Then we are forced to redefine what is Indian nation and Indian nationalism. And for that, we will have to come with an alternative idea of India. And that is what we mean when we say that civilization will have to be reimagined. Now, Bhargav brought the point as far as I could follow him because the sound was not clear. And Rupali asked that question in a different way, that, how, what is this meaning of reimagining the civilization? So, civilization, the way we look at it, does not exist. It is an imaginary, it is an imaginary, all these intellectuals and scholars use words in their own way. So it is, it is an imaginaire, as the French or somebody else will call it, It is an imaginary entity that is real. This is a contradiction in term. People imagine, if enough people imagine something to be true, that thing, even though imaginary, becomes real for all practical purposes. Okay. So the kind of India we have to imagine may or may not have existed as it is. But if we can convince enough people to imagine that kind of India, that kind of India will begin to become real. So all civilizations are imagined entities, imagined concept. Do you think that the ancient Chinese civilization, which has been roped into the glorious modern project of China, if that was given, if that was objective, nobody imagined it, nobody created it as a narrative, then how come China was not equally successful all through the millennia and all through the centuries? If Chinese civilization was objectively great and objectively given, then how come Chinese suffered the century of humiliation? So one thing we have to clarify, that civilization is not something that lives in the life of people. I myself use that metaphor, but that was a wrong metaphor. That flows in the veins of a people. Civilization flows in the veins of a people. It is a difficult thing to say that it is exactly wrong or exactly right, but I can say more definitely that by reimagining Indian civilization and roping into future politics, I don't mean what flows in the veins of Indian culture and Indian people. I think more in terms of imagining an Indian civilization by selecting historical aspects and episodes of Indian history. I cannot imagine, these Hindutva fellows are free to imagine. I cannot imagine something that did not exist. If we started doing that, then we will not be able to confront that. So we have to select an India where the points that you connect, those dots that you connect becomes map of India. Those points are historical. The points that you connect, those points are historical. But the connections that you make between those historical points, those are ideological. Those are, your argument, your causality argument, that point is causally related to that other point, the way I am saying it, the way I am proposing it. So the India emerges out of historical point by these connecting lines. Those connecting lines are ideological, political. That is what I mean, reimagining an Indian civilization. And that cannot be immediately taken to the masses. Masses cannot reimagine that. If masses are asked to imagine Indian civilization, they will imagine as religious civilization, as Hindu civilization or Muslim civilization, and so on, or Buddhist civilization. So that cannot be a mass project, and that cannot be a mass struggle in the beginning. It has to start with those people, those vanguards that I defined in the last slide, those cultural civilizational vanguards will have to reimagine Indian civilization based on the historical dots that they will select to connect and make the civilizational map of India. That is the project, and that will be needed to define Indian nation and support the nation that comes out of anti-colonialism and republican nation. And that nation, that national purpose, that national mobilization with its imagined civilizational roots will then be roped into creating a popular mind and creating a popular political culture so that liberal democracy cannot be a captive of economic power or some, religious bigoted leaders. So that is the, again, I know that it's such a large project that will take several generations. Of course, people like me will not be around to see that, but it's a very large project and hence necessarily abstract, but it is concrete enough for the political leaders and cultural vanguards of tomorrow to pay attention to, so that the project of India can start in earnest. That is our whole project, in a way of NSI. So I will stop there. I don't know whether I have answered all the questions or not, but you can bring back the question if I have forgotten about your question. Just let me make one last comment. Ashwath has made this comment in the chat box. The general perception in USA is that this war is largely initiated by MAGA group, which is not fully supported by USA ruling class or elite. Then if it is not unanimous decision by USA ruling class, do you think any cracks are developing in USA capitalist class? Then what is the future of America policy towards rest of the world? I think I agree with your question. There is, as usual, always it happens, there is a crack and split in the US ruling class, and that is a very difficult question to answer. That you can't really, there is deep state of the standard kind, whether neocons or Democrats, those deep states also have American empire, they are invested in American empire. And these populist, MAGA kind, populist right wingers, racist populist right wingers, they also would like to have an American empire. And the concept of American empire is very different in those two cases. For example, in case of MAGA and Trump, the original idea was that, what is now often called Monroe Doctrine. Monroe Doctrine was that American continents was the preserve of Americas. Nobody from West elsewhere should try to come to South America, because South America is North America's dominion, so to speak. That was the Monroe Doctrine of 1824. And Monroe Doctrine is, now that America has been ruling in the unipolar world all over the world, it would consciously shrink and come back to Monroe Doctrine, a la Donald, who rules America today. So that is why Monroe Doctrine. So Monroe a la Donald, is the new doctrine that they were proposing. And the Iran war does not really fit into that. So that is why Iran war, they have been pulled in by Netanyahu and by Epstein class and all that, But you are right, American ruling class is divided, even though there is no part of American ruling class which would not like to keep American empire going. They will have different proposals for American empire, to keep American empire going and to adjust to the emergence of China and so on, and how to separate China from Russia, how to befriend Russia or not befriend Russia, but befriend China. There could be those variations, could be there, but all the parts of American ruling class in some way or the other will like to keep American empire going. So the split or the crack inside the American ruling class is that of a strategy and not of anything deeper than that. There is no American ruling class which is not imperialist at the same time. The first question of Anand has indirectly come into my answer, that fueling the fire by US, in other parts of the world, that is true. And if that is the common situation, then the question of human rights violation comes into center. I have already spoken enough on that. I think that when a country is invaded, the internal question of human right violation of that regime necessarily takes the back seat, because the external invasion becomes such a large question for the entire society and entire country that so that has been answered. And Rashmi's comment is general. And then, well, I think Anand is saying that there might be other powers which, there might be other societies and countries which are not boasting about their power, but which can turn out to be as powerful as Iran has shown. Let us hope so. If the such potentially nationalist, powerful, anti-colonial or anti-imperialist countries are there, that is good for the world. But I am hard put to think of which ones are those there. BRICS are there, but this year India is the chairman of BRICS, and India is the worst example of a third world country, is succumbing to Western pressure. And I did not discuss this today. India has some constraints also. So even Indian opposition, which brings in domestic politics, even in the foreign policy, and criticizes Modi, on that count, even that opposition doesn't have the clear foreign policy formulated for itself, because that assumes that anti-China is given for India. And hence West, is the only, West is to be befriended first. And hence India has a chance of emerging as an economic power and as a political power only with the help of West, But the West, not of the Trump kind, West of the liberal or neocon or a standard type. It's the standard capitalist of the Western world. So the opposition in India even the opposition in India has its eyes fixed on West, and it takes it for granted that China will be the enemy, The only difference will be that the opposition in India will be willing to revive its friendship with Russia and try to befriend, restart SARC and have relatively friendly relations with Pakistan and Bangladesh and other countries in the SARC, which has been completely, destroyed by this regime. And India has done itself an immense, harm, in foreign policy of this regime. So the opposition foreign policy in India will be slightly better than the foreign policy of this current regime, but there is much to be desired even there. So I am at a loss to see, do we see Brazil standing up to America? Do we see who? Do we see South Africa? Yes, but South Africa is more value-based opposition to genocide in Gaza, to American imperialism and so on. But the strength of South Africa is very limited, as South Africa is burdened with internal problems to such an extent that it cannot really play, other than normative or value-based role of Nelson Mandela kind, or Gandhi kind. It cannot really play a big role in real politics of the world, So I am at a loss to think which countries are potential Irans, if India, such a large and potentially powerful country, cannot stand up to West for various reasons, then who is going to stand up to West? Let us see what Europe does. Europe is now rethinking. So, Macron gave a very interesting speech in South Korea. He said that, he spoke Nehruvian non-alignment language, that we should not be dominated by US, but we should not be dominated by China. So we should carve out a non-aligned path for Europe, So Europe is rethinking. But how can a Macron or a Germany or a UK think of a non-aligned role, which is, equidistant from China and US, and while keeping Russia as the main enemy of Europe, and imagining as if Russia is going to invade and capture Paris and of course Berlin, So it's this Russophobia, let me call it that, European of the European mind is a big problem. And if they don't, settle their things with Russia, how can they play an important role? My dream will be that India becomes a nationalist based on Indian anti-imperialism and Indian civilization. And Europe wakes up to carve out an independent path. Europe is good at creating good society internally, but that it could do only through NATO and American protection. So what kind of foreign policy new Europe will adopt so that it could keep its good society project alive, good welfare society alive, prosperity can be regenerated, and the international relations could be managed in such a way that it cannot be cornered and it cannot go on decline. That Europe has to decide, and India is in similar boots. And then there is natural, if any part of West that I find India can befriend and take advantage of, that is not America, that I think is Europe, but Europe of a different kind, which is non-aligned between, um, uh, two future superpowers, but more friendly. I cannot say that I mean, Nehru's India was non-aligned, but was very close to one pole, Soviet Union. And very distant from America. So same way, the non-aligned future Europe will have to be closer to China than to US. That's a big shift, and that cannot happen without Europe settling its affairs with Russia. And if that Europe and Russia can achieve, and then India is wise enough to befriend them, then I feel that India, Russia, and that reconfigured Europe, are that future powerful non-aligned bloc that can keep both the superpowers, namely US and China, at bay. That is the dream I have, but I don't know how to realize that dream.
The current news is that Donald Trump is admitted to a hospital due to a massive heart attack. Whether it is real or not, but there were other news analysis going on for the past 2 days that American deep state or American ruling classes are thinking somehow to get out of this embarrassing war and to remove Trump with some kind of a deal, giving some immunity to him and remove him and replace him with Vice President J.D. Vance. Maybe this heart attack is also part of that. We don't know. Whatever happens, America is going to learn a very, very unforgettable lesson this time. This is probably the most tumultuous times when history is changing in a big way before our own eyes. We generally don't get this opportunity to witness when big changes happen. Such large-scale things happened at the end of Second World War, and I think we are witnessing some such thing before our own eyes. And as things develop and take shape, more and more clear shape, we keep on discussing things, and we need to come back to this ongoing story, which is most important for the entire humanity and globe, also very particularly how India will shape in this situation and how India will, what kind of place India can aspire to, and what internal changes are necessary for for India to achieve such significance in whatever new shape the world is going to take. If there are no other questions and comments, I think we are drawing to close to this session, engaging session. If there are no any other new questions or comments or clarifications, I propose to call it a day today. So I take this silence as no questions.
There are questions, but let us keep on, discussing in our further meetings, because there are many more questions.
We also need to reflect on.
Yeah, of course. It's highly engrossing discussion.
And moreover, things are not yet clear. They are taking shape, and many uncertainties are there. immediate level, how this war is going to end, and what Europe is going to play, what kind of a role Europe is going to play. Many questions are there, and definitely it
But
is very
at the same time, we should keep in mind, of course, war is a big thing. Everything is very big thing for us. We are too small, so everything is big, you know. But for us, it is important that we keep on learning and we keep on putting together a robust framework in which whatever is thrown at us by the world or by the country or by the rulers, you know, or by the economy, we can make sense of that. That I define as the main NSI project, because those kind of vanguards and those kinds of wise and experienced parties are not in existence. Left is on the decline everywhere, and there is no leader to show us the path, show us the way. So we are on our own, sink or swim. So it is, you know, NSI effort is to put together a progressive Marxist revolutionary, you know, in the new sense, in the new way. Revolution will be redefined in the new century, you know, framework under which we can try to understand whatever we are confronted with. You know, that is the project, you know, and that should be project of each one of us. We all are. This is a project that is way beyond the capacity of any one of us and all of us. Each one will find, you know, kind of weighed in by the largeness of the problem, by the complexity of the problem. And yet, you know, it is our task to learn and take NSI seriously. Take NSI seriously, no matter how self-sounding it sounds, you know. Take NSI seriously because, you know, it is doing important work despite all of us being, you know, nearly irrelevant individuals, you know, who will not matter much and who will not be able to influence much of the society and the world. Still, we are doing important work. So pay attention to that. Be a regular at the NSI study circles. Find a way to contribute to NSI project and find a way to take NSI words to whoever, whichever 2 or 5 or 10 people you can take it to.
With that note, we'll call it a day. Thank you, everybody.